So, Patrick, good morning. We're going to be talking today about why results matter. And obviously, you and I are trial lawyers. So, when we're talking about why results matter, what we're really looking at in our line of work is clients that ultimately have a result that makes a difference in their lives.
That's right. Good morning to you. And welcome everyone to the Johnson, Vorhees, and Martucci podcast series. We are excited to present this to you both for informational purposes and just to maybe get you educated on the law and thinking about the law and why there are lawsuits. But yes, we are trial lawyers, and that means that I like to think we have a direct impact on people's lives. People have been through a crisis and are looking for help, order, and understanding to find a way to rebuild their lives. And that's what we do day in and day out. It's why I get up in the morning, and it's why I've dedicated my professional career to doing. So we are going to talk about why results matter, and results matter for a variety of reasons that we're going to explain today.
Maybe a distinction is important. Nobody in our line of work goes to prison. We're not going to keep anybody out of prison. What is it we do instead?
We are civil lawyers, and that means that we represent people generally in civil cases that have been injured due to the fault, neglect, negligence, sometimes even intentional acts of other people. The only thing that the law allows is money. It's money justice. Money is the measure of justice to compensate people for the harm that they have suffered, for the impact on their family, for the impact on their finances. That's what civil lawyers do, and that's all the law allows. We cannot, as you say, send people to jail, and we cannot make bad actors change their conduct. We cannot make bad truck drivers inspect their vehicles more closely. We cannot make them agree to drive within the legal number of hours that they're allowed to drive. We cannot make them stop driving when they're tired, and we cannot make doctors change the way they practice if they have a bad technique that injures their patients. Now, hopefully through the money justice and through the result that we obtain, we can encourage people to change their behavior. But we cannot flat out make them do that or send them to jail or prison for doing that.
You and I see a lot of folks that when we're talking to them, that they are relaying to us how their lives have been suddenly, unexpectedly turned upside down. Many times that they're in physical pain. Oftentimes they have great emotional depression or distress that's occurring because of a loved one that's been lost. And oftentimes their lives seem like they're completely out of control to them at the point. So as a counselor of law, oftentimes we find ourselves counseling people about how it is that they can regain control of their lives, how it is that they can find hope, how it is that they can do what I hear over and over again, make sure that this same thing doesn't happen to somebody else. So, folks, when they're seeing us, realizing that this is going to ultimately be a matter where we can only bring them money justice, they're still hoping not only for maybe a result that helps them get their lives back financially, but they're hoping that this same thing that they're dealing with, other people in their community are not going to have to have the same loss or harm that they've experienced.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. In fact, let me start with where you began in your question in your explanation. Is people come to us and their lives have been upended through a tragedy. And that is something that I never get used to or never get callous to hearing. Everybody has a story that explains how their life has been upended and affected. And that's always very moving to me. In fact, when cases come in, we get a brief explanation, just general overview. And I can tell those cases that are going to be emotionally moving to me, that's going to affect me throughout the rest of the day. And oftentimes I'll schedule those towards the end of the day for a couple reasons, so that I can spend as much time with that client as needed to fully understand their story. And also because I know it's going to affect me emotionally and affect me throughout the day. I have cases to this day that I've handled years ago that still haunt my thoughts, haunt my memories, and I stay in touch with those people. But you hear their story and you go through, and first I explain to them, okay, this is what we can do for you, and try to break it down for them. First of all, I try to explain that we are going to take some of the pressure off of you of dealing with insurance companies, dealing with bill collectors that occur when these tragedies happen. We will take that over and we'll deal with them so that you can get on with rebuilding your life or with grieving if it's the death of a loved one. Then I explain to them what the process is. And then they always say, well, it's not about the money. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to someone else. And I explain to them that they certainly have the right mindset, but I cannot change people's behavior, and I cannot prevent them from engaging in the same conduct. Here locally, we have some healthcare providers that we call frequent flyers or repeat offenders that have hurt multiple patients of theirs. We have trucking companies that have had multiple safety violations that end up harming people. I explained to them, while we can't compel or force that doctor or trucking company to change their conduct, it does have ramifications that hopefully will cause them to change their conduct, whether it be through the medical disciplinary boards, or whether it be through the commercial licensing companies, but it can affect them, or just their reputation. But it can affect them, and also paying a large money judgment can encourage them to change their conduct. I have had examples, specific examples, if you want to get to those now, where aside from adequately compensating our clients for the harm and injury that they've suffered, it's brought about positive change in attitudes and change in conduct. One case that comes to mind is there was this intersection, somewhat in a rural area, that was governed by stop signs. And over the course of several years, tractor trailers would go through there and they'd make turns to avoid the weight scales. And the Department of Transportation knew that was going on. And when they would make those turns, the same stop sign would be knocked over by the tractor trailer. Well, my investigation, I saw over the course of years, it was 8 to 10 times that stop sign had been knocked over. And every time the Department of Transportation went out, they put the same stop sign on the same wooden post in the same area, only to get knocked over again. Well, as fate would have it, one tragic night, there was a young gentleman in his 20s, unfamiliar with the area, at night, driving to meet his wife, and the stop sign's down. He goes into the intersection and gets hit by another car, and he's tragically killed. Well, in addition to compensating his wife, the transportation company did put a light signal out there. That light signal's out there to this day, and to my knowledge, they haven't had any similar tragedies such as that. I've had other cases where money has done good in addition to just compensating the victims. There was a family whose child was run over by the school bus that had just dropped him off. In addition to compensating the family, the mother, what she did with the money is she was able to take some time off of work, and she would take extended vacation. She now goes around the country and she lectures to bus drivers about safety, about the need to watch children, how to watch children as they leave the bus to prevent that thing from possibly happening in the future. And there was numerous examples of that in addition to just providing money damages, money justice to my clients, it has brought about positive change. I'm sure you have several as well.
So when a person comes into us for the first time to talk to us about, here's what happened and what can you do to help me? Sometimes, the answer is, we can't help you at all because the law doesn't give us a framework to do that. But when there is a legitimate claim that they can make, obviously there's several things that can happen afterwards. One thing is we can get answers for them sometimes. So oftentimes we see folks that don't understand why this happened or how it should have been prevented or what they can do about it. And so one thing we can do is get answers for them. Secondly, we can bring them hope again that they're going to be able to get back on a pathway where they have control of their lives, they have control of their future, they can pay the bills. And then moreover, folks sometimes just need, in order to be able to reach a place of peace, they need to know that there has been some level of accountability for what's happened to themselves or their loved ones. All of these are add-ons, I suppose, to this idea of money justice. And then the other thing that you've been talking about is maybe there can be effective policy change, effective change that will prevent the same thing from happening again. You made a great example. I'm going to give you another example. This is a case we actually went to jury trial on against a local hospital here. And the clients were the surviving family members of a lady who had gone in for an MRI, and during the MRI procedure, she had a heart attack and she died on the MRI table. And nobody knew that it had happened until after the MRI was completed and they recognized that this lady had passed away. So rather than having just a simple pulse oximeter on her finger, which would have alerted the technician that there was a problem, too much time passed and they weren't able to resuscitate her. Well, so one with common sense would think that had not happened. Why not have a pulse oximeter on any patient that's going into an MRI just because you want to know whether their heart stops for some reason during the process. And this was a no-offer case where we took to jury trial, and partly it was because apparently across the country that's not a safety measure that has been implemented where one would have a pulse oximeter during an MRI. The jury heard evidence from both sides. We lost this case at trial, and I'll always remember it because we had some jurors that were actually crying when they came out with the verdict. They wanted to make a statement, and the statement was, we want these policy changes to be made, but we believe the evidence hasn't shown that the standard of care requires it. We want the standard of care to require it. The hospital listened to that, and they made that policy change. There were a number of jurors that came around and talked to my clients during that process, Patrick, and these folks that we were representing in the case didn't receive any money damages. In fact, our firm lost money because we funded the case and we went to trial on the case. But it made a difference for them because they knew they were making a difference for somebody else. So, sometimes, you and I will look at a case and we'll say, we're not sure we can actually prove the case, but there's a more important overriding thing that needs to be done here. And clients will want that to occur as well.
And in that example you just gave, you got something that was better than money justice. You got actually a change in behavior, a change in attitudes, and provided for the safety of MRI patients nationwide for years to come. While it didn't immediately help that family, a couple of things happened. I'm sure that they found solitude and happiness in the fact there was going to be a change. It was not going to happen to people in the future. And they learned some things that gave them answers as to why their loved one died. You mentioned one thing, the standard of care, and I just want to make sure people understand what that means in the context of a medical case if you're unfamiliar with it. The standard of care is basically what healthcare providers normally do in the same or similar circumstances. And when you say the standard of care for an MRI is, do they normally put a pulse oximeter, something that reads the patient's oxygen levels while they're undergoing the MRI? And the standard of care, at least at that trial, the jury concluded, was not to have a pulse oximeter. It's not what healthcare providers normally do when putting a patient under an MRI. And you brought about effective change to make that the standard of care so that this will not happen in the future. And that is a result that we could all hope to achieve. We always want to bring help to our client at the time, but we also want to bring about positive change. And you mentioned numerous reasons when clients come to us, why they come to us, and one thing is to get answers. And there have been times that we've had the case reviewed and I've told the client, we don't see that there's been negligence or that there's been a violation of the standard of care in the example you just gave. But I told them, maybe this gives you some peace of mind and some solace that your loved one's life was not lost due to the neglect or due to the negligence of someone else. It was brought about by natural causes. It was something not preventable, and you can maybe find some solace in that, so it's not always tugging at your mind and pulling at your heartstrings for the rest of your life, and you can get on and find closure and move on with it. But those are all great examples, the getting answers, the getting back control of your lives and your future, finding accountability, and bring about effective policy change. I have another example of a case where I brought about positive policy change of a hospital in addition to providing compensation to the victim of negligence. There was a local hospital here. Whenever newborn babies would be born at the hospital, the nurses would take these firstborn photos. Well, it started to bring in props for the newborn photos. They weren't the basic photos. It started out with flowers, headbands, stuffed animals, but then it became somewhat of a competition among the nurses who could take the cutest, most elaborate newborn photos. So they started bringing in their own props. They would bring in baskets. They would bring in all these elaborate things. Well, one day, one nurse brought in a basket and these other props and put the baby in the basket and left the baby on the table by themselves alone to take the photo. Well, the baby shifted and the basket rolled over. The baby fell off the table and fractured its skull. That should not have happened. Certainly you don't have a joyous occasion of the birth of a newborn and expect to bring that baby home with a fractured skull. So I got family and the baby compensation, and in addition, the hospital changed their policy that you're not going to have those elaborate props, or at least nothing that is going to take the baby off the table into a precarious situation. You used to have stuffed animals and flowers, and they brought about effective change by that to hopefully make it safer for babies in the future. So those types of things are the cases that you remember the most because you were able to hopefully prevent these types of things from happening in the future, in addition to helping that individual client.
One of the great things about our job, as you mentioned earlier, at Johnson, Vorhees, and Martucci, we do solely a plaintiff's practice. We represent only folks that have been harmed by somebody's negligent conduct, somebody doing something that was careless, somebody that does something that injures them, sometimes even catastrophically. And when we look at how we do things as compared to some of our colleagues in the profession, or as the approach that we take, it's a client-centered approach. You and I have been friends and been working together for 27, 28 years now, a long time. And we understood from the outset that we were in harmony about the approach that we were going to take, that it's going to be a client-centered approach, that it's going to be different from what the stereotype is of this greedy ambulance chaser lawyer that's only interested in their own benefits, and that we're going to focus on how to make a positive difference in people's lives. So whether it's a car wreck case, whether it's somebody hurt by dangerous condition on a property, or a product that's made defectively to save money and make profit for some manufacturing company, or a healthcare provider that is not taking necessary safeguards to make sure that their patient is taken care of safely and has a result that will help the problem that they're trying to fix. And so ultimately, when we look at this question of why results matter, we've been talking about a number of things. There's a philosophical approach when we take on a claim that we're going to get an end in sight, that we're going to handle the case with zealous advocacy and tenacity, so that they're not sitting there wondering, is my case just collecting dust, or is anything actually happening? And years later, they're still wondering the same question, which is what some folks experience out there. And on the other hand, we're also not going to try to get the cheapest, quickest settlement we can so that we don't have to put any money in the case or time in the case. And we see some of that by members of our profession, that they don't even know the address of a courtroom, let alone how to conduct themselves in a courtroom.
Yeah, that's and that kind of stays along the same thing you've talked about, getting help for the client immediately and then helping others. For example, law firms that try to turn the case over right away, those, first of all, do not help their immediate client. They undervalue the case, and they will settle the case for less than what their client deserves. That does not help the client. What we do here at Johnson, Vorhees, and Martucci is we will get the maximum that we can get for the client, whether by settlement, if the settlement's reasonable, the insurance company wants to be fair, and we can save them expenses and avoid the risk of going to trial. But if the insurance company is not willing to be fair, then we certainly take a trial, and we get the most we can for that client. That helps the client. Sometimes that is not something that results in a quick settlement, but or the wheels of justice don't move quickly because we have to deal with courts' calendars and experts' calendars and other attorneys' calendars and when things can happen. But when that day of justice comes, they can be assured that they got their day in court and they got the maximum that was going to be allowed in their particular case. And they are happy with that as opposed to just getting some quick, easy money that doesn't take care of their future needs. On the other side of that, when you have lawyers that try to turn a case over quickly just to make a quick buck, that brings the overall value of cases down for everybody because insurance companies keep track of what they're paying on types of cases. And so when a similar accident happens, the insurance company says, well, geez, historically we're paying this amount of money on these cases. Why does Johnson and Vorhees and Martucci want so much more? Because other law firms that just turned it over are taking less. So they're driving down the value of cases, and that means that we have to show that insurance company, no, that's not the way business, or that's not the way justice is done, or done correctly for clients. So we take them to trial, or we prove to them that our clients are worth more and that they certainly are entitled to pay more. And hopefully we are raising the bar, raising the value of cases for other people affected.
So one of the points you're making here is insurance companies do their own research, and not only do they have a model where they will pay out based on what other similar claims are settling for, they are also trying to understand who it is that's representing a person. And you and I, when we first started, we actually started together in an insurance defense firm. So we learned a little bit about what insurance companies think and how they go about things. And then we also talk with some of our defense colleagues now about this. And the leverage that gets created to get the right result springs from the insurance people knowing that if they won't give us a meaningful choice, give our clients a meaningful choice, a fair compromise, that they're going to face a jury, that we know how to put the case on, a compelling case, and that we get results with juries. So that makes a difference in what they're willing to do with our clients when they know that we're not just going to take the cheap, easy way, that we're going to put the time, effort, and money into the case, that we're going to work the case aggressively so that they're going to have to be spending money with their defense lawyers, and that if they don't at least put a number on the table that is something that the client looks at and says, this does make a difference for me and I don't want to risk it, that a jury is going to make the decision. Last year, 2019, our firm tried 7 cases to the jury. We won 5 of them. These were hard cases, and I think most of them, maybe all of them, were no-offer cases going in.
True.
So we settled 80% of the cases that are the hard cases we settled last year that we were working on that were ready for results. But the other cases we took to trial. I'm focusing on catastrophic injury cases now because we obviously settled a lot more that are not in that category. But what that means is because we went to trial 7 times, won 5 of those trials, 3 of them with $1 million plus verdicts, that it makes it better for the other clients in the firm because the people out there that are making the payment decisions know that we get results.
That's exactly right. There's one firm I know about that is one of the firms that try to get quick results just by settling every case. I've never heard of them trying a case, but I have had clients show up to our office and say, this firm had my case originally. The insurance company is not offering any money, and they tell me my case needs to go to trial. They won't take my case to trial, and they say go to Johnson and Vorhees and Martucci because they will take your case to trial. You do not know when you first hire a lawyer if your case is going to get settled or go to trial. The insurance companies get to pick and choose what cases they settle and what cases that they're going to make be tried. So you don't know what the insurance company's decision is going to be when you hire a lawyer. You want a lawyer that is going to stay with your case from the birth of the case through the end of the case and be willing to take your case to trial and not just say, well, the insurance company is not going to offer any money, so we can't take your case to trial. That is a huge injustice. And you talked about some of the ways insurance companies go about valuing their case. And part of it is based upon what lawyers represent them. I have had attorneys on the other side representing the insurance company tell me, the only reason we paid money in this case is because it was your firm. any other firm, we would not have offered any money. And some insurance companies even go as far as having computer programs where they type in your injuries and some basic information, and it kicks out a number, and that is the number that they are going to offer to settle your case. They remove the human element entirely. And what we do is all about people, and it is filled with the human element. Everybody has a different story. Everybody's damages and harms are different. And you want a lawyer that's going to present your unique harm to the jury to get them to understand it, and go against what the insurance company is saying by removing the human element, just saying our computer program says your case is worth this. That is not what you want at all. I had a client just this year that got her case resolved. It was resolved for $1 million. And I didn't know this. And she told me right after it resolved, she says, we went to 8 lawyers before we went to your firm, and all 8 lawyers turned us down. But I wasn't going to give up, and you were the 9th lawyer that we went to, and you took our case, and we're glad you did because you got this result for us. And that's part of results matter, and the lawyers you choose matter. And those are some prime examples.
Patrick, one or two things I want to make sure that folks that might be still listening to this podcast understand. Our clients ultimately regain control of their lives. They get to control whether a case settles or whether it doesn't. So sometimes folks may be hearing this thing called trial attorneys and thinking about what some of the things we've been talking about regarding going to trial. They think, I don't want to go to trial. I'm afraid to go to trial. I don't want a jury to have to decide this. Clients get to make that decision 99% of the time because a meaningful choice has been provided to them, oftentimes with simple cases before a lawsuit even has to be filed. With more complex, more catastrophic cases, we almost always see those have to be litigated before they can get up to a point where a meaningful choice is made. But our goal, I believe, is to ultimately and ideally, as soon as we can, put the clients in a position of having that meaningful choice to make. Sometimes the choice is hard. Sometimes the choice is, I think I may be compromising too much, but I want it to be over. And then they decide to resolve the case. They decide that this result is sufficient for what I was aiming for. And then there are those other cases, and we talked about it earlier. Last year there was a half dozen cases where there was no offer made, and we were willing to take it on to trial. And one of those results was $7.8 million. We had a couple others that were in the millions. So sometimes the jury has to make that ultimate decision because a client hasn't been given the choice. Whichever way it goes, though, that end in sight gets made as aggressively as we can. And one last thing I want to mention about this is with clients, what matters most to them? One of the things that matters most, in my view, is they want to know that we got their backs, that we're taking care of their case, so to speak, but really what their life is about from the litigation part when we are litigating a case. And that means that they can call us and we can talk to them rather than ignore them. That means they can email us, they get a response rather than weeks going by thinking, did they even get my email? Sometimes they're even texting back and forth. Communication that's client-centered is part of what honorable lawyers do, rather than lawyers that are only about themselves. So if you're a prospective client, or if you're a client that is, or if you're somebody who needs a lawyer, one of the things you ought to be asking yourself or the lawyer you're talking to is, will you really respond when I have questions? Will you really be working on my case during the next few months? Do you know where a courtroom is? Do you know how to take a deposition? Have you taken depositions before? Do you know how to cross-examine somebody at trial? Have you ever done that before? How often do you do it? Because there's some marketers around here, Patrick, that are on billboards or on TV all the time, sometimes even, supposedly having a special relationship with a Kansas City chief. But they don't know where the courtroom is, and if they were being honest, they would say, I'm not even handling cases anymore. I'm just the face of the company.
And that's a you make a good point. And in fact, if you ever read the fine print on most billboards, and it should be there, it's probably too fine to read, or if you ever hear it on the radio, the Missouri bar and most states' bar associations require that it say the choice of an attorney is an important decision and should not be based upon advertising alone. And no truer words have been spoken. You should look into the lawyers that you choose. Are they the type that will take a case to trial? What sort of reputation do they have? You can walk the halls here at our firm, and we have newspaper write-ups of the results we have obtained by believing in our clients, diligently and tenaciously representing them, and not giving in to the insurance companies who like to act like they have all the power and they make the rules, and get justice for our clients. And it's important to understand that the clients, as you say, do make those decisions. They do have control. Do I take my case to trial? Do I accept this offer or not? We counsel them whether we think the insurance company is being fair with them or if they are trying to undervalue their claim. And we do all our cases on what's called a contingency basis, meaning there's no financial risk to the client at the outset. We only get paid if the client gets paid. Even if we take the case to trial, we could end up, if a justice doesn't go in their favor, that we end up losing money. But that's okay. I want the client to know that they were and believe that they got their day in court and they were represented, even if the jury did not see it our way. So it's at no financial risk to them. And they need to know that an attorney does have their back. And it's not about numbers, it's about people. And that's what we're about here at Johnson, Vorhees, and Martucci. And I tell people, often clients come to me and they say, you represent me in this lawsuit. I have this opportunity, even though I lost my job because of this injury, where I can get another job. Or should I go back to this same doctor because I'm having this same problem? And I tell them, I said, look, you do what's best for your life. You get your life in order. Don't make decisions about your life based upon a lawsuit. Your lawsuit will fall in order, but do what's best for you. Don't do what's best for a lawsuit, or don't do what's best for what you think your attorney wants. Do what's best for you, and your lawsuit will fall in order. That's having control over your life, yet at the same time have an attorney that got your back.
One last thing I want to mention before we wrap up, and this is an anecdote that you and I were talking about earlier. We've been doing this long enough now where sometimes we've got clients that we represented when they were little ones, and they're now adults. So, and fortunately, we're able to stay in touch with them from time to time. And you and I were talking about one of my favorite clients, because this was a young fella that was injured as a child, actually became blind because of failure to diagnose a childhood glaucoma type problem.
That's right.
And they had this occur in North Carolina. The parents had moved to Missouri with the child. And so we litigated this case in North Carolina by special licensing that we were able to get. And I remember this case keenly, and as you and I were talking before we got started, because the case was in litigation, and the insurance adjuster wanted to do a mediation, wanted me and my client, the mom, to go to North Carolina for a mediation, which is typically where there's a negotiation occurs and many cases get settled. Well, we traveled to North Carolina, and the insurance adjuster told me right out of the gate, I just wanted to look you in the eye and tell you that I was never going to pay $1 on your case, ever. And I wanted you to come so I could tell you that. So we traveled all the way to North Carolina for that. And about 9 months later, they paid about $1.5 million on that case after their own expert agreed that there had been negligence involved in the care of this child. This child is now an adult. You stay track with a couple of things in them, because I think he got into swimming, and your kids are into swimming, right?
Correct.
And I've been in touch with him recently because he's now in law school. He's going to be a lawyer, and just blind, but because of the financial compensation that we were able to help him with, he was able to have accommodations so that he could lead a relatively normal life and overcome the challenges he had.
And I distinctly remember that case because I remember some of the stories was when he was in elementary school, went to a private elementary school, someone that could help him with his handicap. And during recesses, he would basically just stand within a few feet of the teacher and just kind of paced back and forth just because he couldn't go out and play because he was afraid of getting hurt. And every once in a while, the teacher would have to wander off and deal with another child. And he would stop and say, "Where's she? Where'd she go? Where'd she go?" Ask another child. And that just touched my heart. And then years later, not only was he into swimming, Roger, but he was on the high school swim team with my son. So he was part of a high school sporting team, swimming, doing well, actually. He was a good swimmer. And able to do it all by himself, and you couldn't even tell that he had that visual impairment. But that was because you, through your tenacity and not letting the insurance company try to intimidate you, and not letting the insurance adjuster in that case try to create the rules and the guidelines and what the parameters were for that case. You said you were going to do the right thing and stand up by your client, even if it meant trying a case in North Carolina, and you got the financial means so that that child could get the help that he needed and go to law school and succeed in high school. And I remember one of the options for that family was that they were going to have to send him to St. Louis. They lived locally in Joplin. Send him to a special school in St. Louis where he can get some help he needed if they didn't have the financial means. And he would basically have to live at that school in St. Louis as a child. And because of the outcome you got for them, he was able to stay home with his family where he should have been, and they were able to get the help that he needed in their own home. And just a tremendous result that I'll remember forever.
Which makes our gig about the best going, don't you think?
Exactly. That's why I wake up in the morning. That's why I love what I do.